I'm not sure how to start, because this is technically not new or unexpected. Afghanistan has become the new headquarters for global jihad. Everyone saw this coming. The problem is nobody bothered stopping it. So this is what we have now. Terror groups of all descriptions, active and resurgent in Afghanistan. The United Nations has released a new assessment. It details which groups are there and what they're up to. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of Afghans are at the border with Pakistan waiting to flee the Taliban regime. Plunging into the unknown, the United Nations is talking about sending aid to Afghanistan. Donors, we are told, have pledged more than $1 billion. That's very good. But where will all of this money go? What mechanism does the UN have? Will the world make the same mistake with Afghanistan as it made with Pakistan? Fund a terror state, flush it with money in the name of humanitarian aid, and see it directed to their military coffers. We'll discuss all of this also on the show tonight. In Washington, the focus has shifted to China. Biden is preparing to host the first in-person Quad summit. Taiwan and Japan, meanwhile, are bracing for a Chinese strike. In Africa, a new turf war between Russia and the West. Russian mercenaries look to join the fight in Mali. France has objected. We'll tell you why. In the US, a heart patient has died after failing to find an ICU bed. His family tried 43 hospitals in 3 states. What does this tell you about the US healthcare system? And another high for South Korean music band BTS. Seoul has given them diplomatic passports. They'll attend the United Nations General Assembly as envoys. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Delhi police has arrested 6 terror suspects, including 2 terrorists who were trained in Pakistan. Explosives and firearms, including AK-47s, were recovered in a multi-state operation across India. Qatar has warned it would not take responsibility for the Kabul airport without clear agreements with all those involved, including the Taliban. While responding on WION's question on Taliban's Kashmir policy, Taliban's Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi says while they stand for the oppressed elsewhere in the world, if there is a conflict, it should be solved through talks. Meanwhile, the Taliban Foreign Minister has called on the US to remove its blacklisted ministers from the sanctions list as per the Doha Agreement, calling the blacklisting cruel and baseless. Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett met Egyptian President al-Sisi for bilateral talks in the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh. This was the first official trip by an Israeli head of government to Egypt in a decade. Bennett says the talks covered issues of diplomacy, security and economy, and that the leaders created a foundation for deep connection going forward. Norway's centre-left opposition parties have won Monday's general election. They will now negotiate on how to form a coalition, with climate change and a widening wealth gap expected to be central to the discussions. According to a report, Facebook exempts certain celebrities, politicians and other high-profile users from some of its own rules for posts as part of a program launched as a quality control mechanism. Nigeria is witnessing one of its worst cholera outbreaks in years. Close to 70,000 suspected cholera infections had been recorded in the first week of September. Hurricane Nicholas has made landfall in Texas. It is expected to cause up to 18 inches of rainfall in the Houston area. Meteorologists have warned of life-threatening flooding. Sri Lankan cricket legend Lasith Malinga has retired from T20 internationals, bringing an end to a glorious playing career. The 38-year-old is the highest wicket taker in the shortest format and won the T20 World Cup in 2014. The pacer had already ended his Test and one-day international career and also retired from franchise cricket earlier this year. Brazilian football great Pelé will be moved out of intensive care this week as he continues his recovery from surgery. The 80-year-old's daughter said he is doing well and should be back home soon. The 3-time World Cup winner underwent surgery to remove a tumor from his colon in Sao Paulo.
On the 31st of August, the United Nations Security Council held a meeting. It was on Afghanistan. India was the council president then. They adopted a resolution. It said Afghan soil should not be used to shelter terrorists. That was 2 weeks back. 2 weeks is all they took to turn Afghanistan into the new headquarters for global jihad. This is according to the United Nations. It says the Lashkar-e-Toiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed are not just present in Afghanistan, they're quote-unquote active on the battlefield. How many of them? Anywhere between 6,000 to 6,500 Lashkar and Jaish terrorists. They're looking to make Afghanistan their permanent base. Last month, we told you how a large number of terrorists had entered Kabul. This was days after the Taliban takeover. These men belong to the Jaish-e-Mohammed and the Lashkar-e-Toiba, also the Islamic State. Now the UN says there are many more. According to another assessment, terrorists of all descriptions are relocating to Afghanistan. Here's a breakdown. First, we have the Al-Qaeda. They're the closest to the Taliban for obvious reasons. The Taliban had shielded Osama bin Laden when the US launched their war on terror. Now they're protecting what remains of the Al-Qaeda. According to a United Nations assessment in June, the Al-Qaeda is active in 15 out of 34 provinces in Afghanistan. Half of them. Next on the list is Al-Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent. This is an extension of the Al-Qaeda, a separate affiliate for South Asia. In the past, this group has tried to create a module of Indian nationals. It was weakened by the US offensive. Now it is active again in Afghanistan. Number 3, the Islamic State Khorasan, ISIS-K. The same organization that carried out the Kabul airport suicide attack. Going by one estimate, the ISIS-K has around 2,000 members in Afghanistan. They're mostly active in northern and eastern provinces. Number 4 is the Haqqani network. Well, they're part of the government now, a group that has a direct presence in the government. Its leader, Sirajuddin Haqqani, is now the interior minister of Afghanistan, but they're still a terrorist group. And going by the latest available estimates, the group has anywhere between 2,000 to 4,000 members. They divide their time between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Then we have the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. They fought the Afghan civilian government with the Taliban. This group stands to benefit from the Taliban's rise. Add the Lashkar-e-Toiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed, and this takes the list to 7. At least 7 major terrorist groups active in Afghanistan as we speak. The new headquarters of global jihad with implications outside the country. You see, these terrorist groups have affiliates the world over. And these affiliates are enthused by the Taliban's win. A terrorist group has taken over a country. World powers are engaging with it. The United Nations is talking about sending aid. The US is calling them businesslike. Their government is telling the world to not interfere in internal matters. What more could terrorists ask for? So groups elsewhere are pledging allegiance to the Taliban. The Al-Qaeda in Arabian Peninsula says the Taliban's rise marks the beginning of a pivotal transformation across the world. The Al-Qaeda affiliate in North Africa says the Taliban takeover is proof, and I'm quoting, that the only way to restore the Ummah's glory is through jihad. Ummah, of course, is a reference to the global Muslim community. In Somalia, the Shabab al-Mujahideen has said, and I'm quoting again, as we were rejoiced with the news of Afghanistan of pride, we give the glad tidings to our Muslim Ummah that the news of the trenches of jihad is another source of happiness, whatever that means. These statements speak for themselves, though. Terrorists the world over have found a new base, a new headquarters for jihad, and the Taliban are their new role model. This is America's gift to the world after their 20-year-long war. And India, among others, is being forced to deal with this new threat at its doorstep. Today, Maulavi Amir Khan Muttaqi, the foreign minister of the so-called Taliban government, appeared before the press. He is a United Nations sanctioned terrorist, the foreign minister of Afghanistan. WION's correspondent Anas Malik was there at the press conference. We asked him about the Taliban's Kashmir policy. Will the Taliban meddle in Kashmir? What will it do with the United Nations sanctions? Will they demand a delisting from the global body? Here's what he said.
Anas Malik from WION. What is Taliban's Kashmir policy? Because it would decide the course of action with India and Pakistan both. Thank you.
Kashmir and everywhere else where there is tyranny, our policy is that we should stand with them. However, if there is a conflict between the two countries, like how it's said in the world to solve issues through talks, we would also emphasize solving it through talks. However, we stand with those who are oppressed.
What happens to the UN listing? Because we're seeing that at least 17 individuals of this 33 cabinet are listed by UN. You yourself is a listed individual. How do you plan on getting off the list from the UN? Because you have UNGA coming up, who will be representing Afghanistan. Thank you.
They continue to be on the list even now. It's a cruel and baseless decision. We demand and hope that the issue will be resolved. If they want Afghanistan to grow and progress, then they should abolish the sanctions. During the Doha talks, US said that all will be excluded from the blacklist.
The Taliban want to, quote-unquote, raise their voice for Kashmiri Muslims. Safe to say no one is listening to them. But here's a question for the world community. How do you punish the Taliban without punishing the people they rule? It's a tough question. We've seen how sanctions work in North Korea, in Iran. They don't just affect the regime, they affect ordinary people everywhere in the world. Afghanistan is no different. If anything, it's worse. Let me show you some numbers. 2/3 of Afghans live below the poverty line. 2/3. 14 million Afghans are on the brink of starvation. 1 million of them are children. Who can help them? Not the Taliban for sure. Let me introduce their finance minister to you, Mullah Hidayatullah Badri. He bankrolled suicide bombings in Kandahar. Now he is managing the Afghan economy. Talk about a promotion from hell. The Taliban can't even run an airport. How can they run a country? The fact is they can't. Not without help from the global community. On Monday, donors pledged $1.2 billion for Afghanistan. It's a lot of money, $1.2 billion. But it's not a permanent solution. You can't just keep shipping rice and milk every month. Aid is supposed to fill the gaps in a country's economy, not feed its entire population. So what's the solution here? Rebuild the Afghan economy. And this is where things get complicated. The United Nations chief wants to directly inject cash into Afghanistan. Listen in.
My appeal to the international community is to find ways to allow for an injection of cash in the Afghan economy, allowing the economy to breathe and avoiding a collapse that would have devastating consequences for the people of Afghanistan and possibly would trigger a massive exodus with the consequences that you can imagine in relation to the stability of the countries of the region.
Well, he's right. The Afghan economy does need cash. But there's a flip side to it. The Taliban control the finance ministry. They also control the central bank. So any cash injection will flow through the Taliban. Who knows what they'll do with this money? Maybe arm more terror groups or swindle it to fill their pockets. I'll give you an example. You might remember this Taliban leader who was interviewed on Afghan television. He said women should not be in government. They should just give birth. That same Taliban leader was at the Kabul airport. He was receiving aid shipments from Qatar. If these men are Afghanistan's best bet, the country's fate is sealed. But the United Nations does not see it that way. They say humanitarian assistance is impossible without the Taliban's help.
It's impossible to provide humanitarian assistance inside Afghanistan without engaging with the facto authorities of the country. And I do believe that it is very important to engage with the Taliban at the present moment for all aspects that concern the international community, be it about terrorism, be it about human rights, be it about drugs, be it about the nature of the government.
Well, that's a slippery slope. Suppose the world keeps aid money flowing. It unfreezes Afghan reserves abroad. What leverage does it have left? What is stopping the Taliban from unleashing terror? Nothing. The global community is once again underestimating the Taliban. They don't want a seat at the United Nations, let me repeat. They don't want embassies or consulates. They only want money. Money to run their Islamic emirate as they please. Until now, the world could dangle that carrot. The US froze $9 billion worth of Afghan reserves. The IMF blocked access to loans worth $440 million. That tap was basically shut. And that was the world's leverage, their trump card against the Taliban. Now the UN is talking about opening that tap. Does the United States agree? Well, they're still hoping that the Taliban will reform. This is what America's envoy to the UN said. We need oral and written commitments made by the Taliban about operating rights of humanitarian agencies and the treatment and rights of minority groups, women and girls to be upheld. Words are not good enough. We must see action. What more must the Taliban do? They've shown enough action. They announced an all-male cabinet. They're putting women in segregated classes. They're bringing back public whipping. Clearly, the Taliban don't care about their promises, and this was before aid money was released. Now they have the license to go rogue with Western money, Western weapons, and maybe soon Western recognition. How does the global community navigate this problem? How can aid reach Afghans but not the Taliban? For starters, put a pin on cash payments. It's too early to be handing out money to the Taliban. Two reasons why. One, the money will not reach ordinary Afghans. And two, it will end up boosting the Taliban's arsenal. So here's what the global community can do instead. Keep up the periodic interventions, send doctors, send aid workers until a more permanent setup can be negotiated. It's been done before. We've seen it in Syria, so it's not impossible. The next couple of months will be crucial. The harsh winter will set in. It's a test for the world. They should learn from the mistakes made with Pakistan. Don't fund terror states. Try to reach the people. And the situation in Afghanistan is forcing its neighbors and regional alliances to re-evaluate their strategy. In light of these events, here's a question. What does the future hold for the Quad? We may finally get some answers next week. On the 24th of September, the first ever in-person summit of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue will be held in Washington, D.C. Attending it will be leaders of all 4 member nations. US President Joe Biden, Japan's outgoing Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga, Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison and India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi. They will all meet in Washington, D.C. They last met at a virtual summit in March this year. This is the first in-person meeting. At the White House, the Biden administration says it shows their priority, their focus on the Indo-Pacific. Well, sure it does. The agenda is on expected lines: COVID, China, climate change, cyberspace, a free and open Indo-Pacific, the usual stuff. But each country comes with its own specific priorities. For Japan, for instance, the timing is critical. Prime Minister Suga is stepping down, and he's the second Prime Minister of Japan to resign in 12 months. Now, like any country, Japan wants to be seen as a stable democracy. But frequent leadership changes do not help, especially when China is breathing down their neck. The provocations are growing. On Sunday, for instance, a suspected Chinese submarine was spotted near Japan's territorial waters. It came with a Chinese destroyer. Tokyo sees this as an escalation. Japan has issued a warning about possible attacks in Southeast Asian countries. What kind of attacks? Suicide bombings. By whom? We don't know that yet. All we have is a warning from Japan's foreign ministry urging citizens to stay away from religious facilities and public places. And this applies to 6 Southeast Asian nations: Indonesia, the Philippines, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, and Myanmar. All of these countries have received the warning. But they say they have no knowledge of such a threat, and Japan won't enunciate. By all means, this issue will be raised at the Quad Summit. What will Australia bring to the table? Well, they recently attended the Malabar naval exercise. Last week, Foreign Minister Marise Payne and Defence Minister Peter Dutton were in India. They met their counterparts in Delhi. It's called a 2+2 dialogue, 2 ministers from each side. So 2+2. Here's what they said.
We have significant issues to discuss. The uncertainty in the Indo-Pacific remains of concern to both of our countries and to our peoples. Strengthening our defence relationship remains an absolute priority from my perspective.
We do share very strong interests in ensuring that Afghanistan never again becomes a safe haven for the breeding or the training of terrorists, and that is an abiding concern of the international community.
India and Australia have common concerns. Both are dealing with an aggressive, expansionist China. They also have a similar view of the Taliban. Unlike the West, remember, Australia is clear about not recognizing the Taliban government. They've also clearly called out Pakistan and its role in Kabul, which basically means that India and Australia can close ranks in Washington, D.C.
Quad is a platform where 4 countries have come to cooperate for their benefit and for the benefit of the world. I think a term like NATO is very much a Cold War term, looking back. I think Quad looks in the future. It reflects globalization. It reflects the compulsions of countries to work together.
That's an interesting choice of words. Compulsions of countries to work together. Which brings us to the hosts. The United States of America, what's their agenda? The American press has some thoughts on this. It says Biden will try to seek commitments on vaccine diplomacy and infrastructure to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative. But America's priority will be Taiwan. Taiwan is a US ally. It's under threat from China. It's bracing for an invasion, no less. Chinese jets have been buzzing over Taiwan. Chinese media is firing warnings, talking about severe military consequences. There are fears of a simulated biochemical attack. What explains China's desperation? Taiwan's growing proximity with the Quad. In the month of August, the Quad listed its priorities. The list had an addition. Stability in Taiwan's trade, that's what they said. The message for China is clear. The alliance backs Taiwan. The US is taking it a step further, in fact, renaming Taiwan's de facto embassy in Washington, D.C. Right now, it's called the Office of the Representative of Taipei. The new name will be Taiwan. China does not like the sound of it, so it has issued a warning. It fell on deaf ears, though. The U.S. Secretary of State Blinken once again called Taiwan a country. The Americans clearly are pushing the envelope. Reports suggest that they may even call for Taiwan's inclusion or increased role in the Quad. Well, here's what we have to say. An angry China breathing fire, scrambling jets, lining up border troops. As countries in the region brace for a Chinese attack, the Quad alliance will have its most significant meeting ever to chart a response. And we'll keep you posted. So Washington believes the Quad can contain China. But what will America do about its arch rival Russia? America and its Western allies are facing a challenge from a hidden enemy in Africa. It's a Russian mercenary force that does not exist on paper. But they go around the world, they launch military campaigns, they give Russia the upper hand. Our next report tells you more about this secret force.
They are one of the world's most effective army of mercenaries. They have tampered with Western democracies, conducted high-profile assassinations, taken over strategic lands, and won wars. But the world hardly knows about them. They are Russia's Wagner Group, and they might soon head to Mali. Reports say the Russian group is close to signing a deal. They are ready to send 1,000 troops to Africa. What's the mission? To shore up the military junta of Mali. The Russians will train the army of Mali and protect senior members of the regime. What do they get in return? More than $10 million a month. Not if France has its way. Paris objected to the idea of Russians fighting in Mali. Mali is a former French colony. France has troops there. They're winding down a major military effort against Islamic terrorism there. France says the entry of Russians will undermine their efforts. Paris has kicked off a diplomatic offensive. It is persuading Mali to drop the deal. France is also roping in allies like the United States and dispatching diplomats to Mali and Russia. But why is France so desperate to kill this agreement? This is not just about fighting terrorists, it's about protecting turf. Russia is entering Mali through the back door. The Wagner Group may appear to be a private military contractor, but reports say it's an extension of the Russian state. The company surfaced when Russia kicked off a campaign to annex Ukraine. In 2014, the Russian army enlisted the help of Wagner's mercenaries. They were known as Little Green Men, and they inflicted a lot of damage. This force allegedly shot down a Ukrainian military aircraft, assassinated separatist leaders, and fought alongside pro-Russian fighters. Russia managed to do all of this while maintaining plausible deniability. Moscow denies any links to the Wagner Group. The company itself doesn't exist on paper. In Russia, there is no business registered by the name of Wagner. The mercenary force is run through a network of businesses and groups that are registered under different names. It suits all sides. It helps Wagner remain in the shadows. And it helps the Russian state expand its clout. In less than a decade, mercenaries from the Wagner Group have been deployed in conflict-hit countries across the world, like Syria, Libya, the Sudan, Ukraine, Venezuela, Central African Republic, and Madagascar. Now, these Russian mercenaries are gearing up to enter Mali and extend the reach of Vladimir Putin's invisible hand. Bureau Report, World is One.
Meanwhile, the crisis in Afghanistan has put the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on the hot seat in the U.S. Congress. America's diplomat-in-chief or foreign minister is facing some tough questions by lawmakers from both parties. He's testifying before the House Foreign Affairs Committee. This is about America's messy withdrawal from Afghanistan. The hearing began on Monday. It should conclude by the end of Tuesday. On day one, Blinken faced a barrage of questions, some of which left him tongue-tied. For instance, he was asked about the withdrawal. Here's what he said.
Did we have a plan to get Americans from all over Afghanistan to Kabul and out in an orderly way? How meticulous was the planning for the Trump administration declared May 1st withdrawal?
Thank you, Congressman. We inherited a deadline. We did not inherit a plan.
You heard that. We inherited a deadline. We did not inherit a plan. Then why did they not come up with a plan? How difficult was that? The deadline set by Donald Trump was the 1st of May 2021. The Biden administration pushed it further to the 31st of August 2021. They had 4 long months to come up with a plan. That is, if you don't count the 8 months they had been in power at that time. 8 months of chalking out a strategy. And yet they botched up. And they're now pinning the blame on their predecessors. To make things worse, Blinken said that the evacuation process from Kabul was, quote-unquote, extraordinary.
The evacuation itself was an extraordinary effort under the most difficult conditions imaginable by our diplomats, by our military, by our intelligence professionals.
The Kabul airport was bombed. Extraordinary indeed. 13 U.S. service members have died. Hundreds of Americans are still stranded. And American weapons are now in the Taliban's hands. What exactly is so extraordinary about this evacuation? And Blinken's answers kept getting bizarre. He was questioned by Ilhan Omar on the drone strike that hit the wrong target and killed civilians, including an Afghan aid worker. She asked him, how does America plan to ensure that drone strikes hit the actual targets? Listen to this exchange.
How can you possibly ensure us that our drone strikes and over-the-horizon capabilities will actually reach their targets?
And I know with regard to the drone strike that you're referring to, that is being looked at very, very, very carefully by others in the administration so that we understand exactly what happened or what didn't happen.
It is being looked at very, very carefully. What about owning up to the mistake? An apology, perhaps? Secretary Blinken offered none of it. The testimony went on. At one point, he was asked about Pakistan, its role in the current crisis. And for once, he acknowledged Islamabad's duplicity. He said that America might reassess its relationship with Pakistan in the days to come.
And I think you're very right to point at the role that Pakistan has played throughout the past 20 years and even before. And it is one that has involved hedging its bets constantly about the future of Afghanistan. It's one that's involved harboring members of the Taliban, including the Haqqanis. This is one of the things that we're going to be looking at in the days and weeks ahead, the role that Pakistan has played over the last 20 years, but also the role that we would want to see it play in the coming years.
Even here, Blinken did not take a firm stand. He acknowledged that Pakistan harbors terrorists, but fell short of promising action. Reassessing relationship is an old card. America uses it when it suits them. What about its relationship with India? He was asked whether Washington has reached out to India, as a possible staging area for future operations against terrorists. Blinken said that the US will rely on India for quote-unquote over-the-horizons operations and is deeply engaged with India over this.
Say generally, Congressman, we're deeply engaged with India across the board. With regard, though, to any specifics about over-the-horizon capabilities and the plans that we put in place or will continue to put in place.
Basically, day one of the Blinken testimony revealed that the Biden administration's standing has taken a serious hit due to its botch-up in Afghanistan. If you needed any more proof, then take a look at these images on your screen. This is Antony Blinken attending the second day of the testimony in person after he was slammed by lawmakers for answering questions from his office. They've now forced him to come to Capitol Hill and take questions face-to-face. The testimony is still underway. We'll keep you updated. And we can tell you Afghanistan is not Joe Biden's only failure. He is presiding over a massive surge in Wuhan virus cases. Tonight, I'll tell you a story from Alabama. It's about a 73-year-old patient, Ray Demonia. He did not have COVID. He was well-to-do. He reached out to 43 hospitals, 43. Yet he ended up dying 300 kilometers away from home. Remember where this is happening, not sub-Saharan Africa, not Latin America. It's happening in the United States, the so-called first world. Here's the full story. On the 23rd of August, Ray Demonia complained of heart problems. He was admitted at the Cullman Regional Medical Center in Alabama. It's a 145-bed hospital, a medium-sized one. 12 hours later, his wife got a call. The hospital could not find a cardiac ICU bed. Not just in their hospital, but virtually anywhere. All the beds were occupied by Wuhan virus patients. They called 43 hospitals in 3 states, 43, no luck. None of them had a specialized ICU bed. Eventually, they did find one. Do you know where? At Rush Foundation Hospital in Meridian, Mississippi. It's almost 300 kilometers away. So Ray Demonia was airlifted to Mississippi, but it was too late. He passed away after being admitted. The family has published an obituary for him. This is what it says. In honor of Ray, please get vaccinated if you have not. In an effort to free up resources for non-COVID related emergencies, he would not want any other family to go through what his did. Who do you blame for this tragedy? Sure, you could point fingers at the health infrastructure in Alabama. It was ranked as the 6th worst state for healthcare in the US. But this patient reached out to 43 hospitals, not just in Alabama, but in 2 other neighboring states. Why were those hospitals filled? Because Americans are refusing to take the vaccine. I'll show you some numbers. The US CDC conducted a study of 13 states over 6 months. Here's what they found. Unvaccinated Americans made up 87% of hospitalizations. 87%. People with 1 vaccine shot made 5.7%. Fully vaccinated people, just 4%. It doesn't get simpler than this. Vaccines save lives. They reduce the risk of hospitalization. The CDC also did a study on vaccines and COVID-related deaths. What did they find? Unvaccinated people are 11 times more likely to die. So what exactly are Americans waiting for? Is there a vaccine shortage? Clearly not. The US is vaccinating teenagers. They're also planning to give a third shot to their citizens. Availability is not their problem. Politics is. Conservatives in the US do not want to get the vaccine. Why? Because they don't want Joe Biden to win. I know it makes no sense. The vaccines were supposed to be Donald Trump's big win. Trump called himself the father of COVID vaccines, but his supporters don't want it. So what does Joe Biden do? Practically nothing. No vaccine mandates, no outreach. Biden simply blamed the conservatives. He basically drove them further away. US vaccinations peaked by around mid-April. Nearly 2 million people were getting vaccinated at that point. Since then, the numbers have been falling. And Joe Biden simply watched on. He did not know what was happening. Or did he? Well, since the Western media barely talked about it, it's quite possible that he wasn't aware. They were so busy hunting sob stories, talking about India and Brazil, while completely ignoring the outbreak in America. Well, this is the result, a completely avoidable death. In April 2020, the same patient, Ray Demonia, had suffered a stroke. In 3 hours, his family found a hospital. Not in Mississippi or Tennessee, but just 50 miles from his home. And remember, this was April 2020. The pandemic had reached the US by then. This time, things did not turn out so well. Ray Demonia died on the 3rd of September, just 3 days before his birthday. Being anti-vax is no longer a political statement. It's a death sentence, not just for you, but the people around you as well. And ironically, these are the same Americans who call themselves pro-life. We'll turn to South Korea now. Their government has appointed 7 new diplomats. They're young, they're charismatic, and they'll bring some bling to dreary old diplomacy. I'm talking about K-pop band BTS. They're now diplomats, believe it or not. All 7 members visited the presidential palace today. It was their first day on the job. President Moon Jae-in gave them their diplomatic passports. But what's their mission? BTS are the special presidential envoy for future generations and culture, basically brand ambassadors. They will travel to New York. They will attend the United Nations General Assembly, the UNGA. They will speak on sustainable development goals. The president could not be happier. He is showing off South Korea's biggest soft power tool. BTS have around 32 million followers on social media, 32 million. They're the most followed band on the internet. In the US, their album sold 500,000 copies in 2020. The same year, they bagged 7 Guinness World Records. Most viewers for a live stream concert, most viewed YouTube video in 24 hours, most weeks at #1 on the Billboard. I could go on. South Korea has tactfully used BTS to build their own brand. Millions of people around the world love K-pop. And through K-pop, they love South Korea. Look at some numbers. BTS brings $3.6 billion into South Korea every year through concerts, licensing, merchandise. They also attract 800,000 tourists every year. That's around 7% of all arrivals. Imagine their pull. Even the United Nations is not immune. Apparently, they requested President Moon to bring BTS along. The UN did. They said the band would represent global youth. It's becoming a common request for the president. Everywhere he goes, they want him to bring BTS along. In fact, the band has visited the UN before in 2018. Their leader spoke at UNICEF. Last year, they sent a pre-recorded message. They asked young people to overcome the challenges of the pandemic and pursue their dreams. This year, they'll return again, not as guests, but as special diplomatic envoys. It's a soft power coup for South Korea. BTS and their fans can change the pulse of the internet. They even managed to beat Chinese state media, and that's no easy task. I'll tell you what happened. Last year, BTS paid a tribute to American soldiers of the Korean War. The Chinese press was livid. How dare they not mention the Chinese soldiers? Global Times punched out op-eds. They slammed BTS for its quote-unquote one-sided attitude. All the outrage lasted 2 days. BTS fans flooded social media with hashtags and tweets. Global Times was outgunned. They started deleting articles from their website. BTS 1, Global Times 0. This is just one example of their global reach. BTS has single-handedly put Korean pop on the map. A whole genre is built around their success. And so they don't want to hear Joe Biden talk about climate change, I'm being honest. They would much rather hear BTS talk about it. And for South Korea, it's the gift that keeps on giving. BTS may fade away, but Korean pop will not. Much like the blue jeans and Coca-Cola for America, K-pop is South Korea's new global ticket. Speaking about stars, some of them don't quite make that mark. On Monday, New York City held the Olympics of Fashion, the Met Gala, an event that sees the who's who of the celebrity world turn up in the most outlandish of outfits, trying to make a statement, both sartorial and political sometimes. Like always, this time too the event has triggered quite a stir. The outfits of two individuals are going viral, and not for the best of reasons. Kim Kardashian, who turned up in a black outfit that covered her from head to toe, and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who wore a gown that read, "Tax the Rich." Just that she wore it to an event that is meant primarily for the rich. An entry ticket costs as much as $35,000. Their choices have divided opinion on the internet and raised questions on the relevance of the Met Gala itself. Here's a report.
After being cancelled last year due to the pandemic, the Olympics of Fashion, the Met Gala, made a dazzling comeback in New York City. The who's who of the celebrity world turned up in some of the most eye-catching and outlandish outfits. Singer Kim Petras came dressed as a horse girl. Canadian musician Grimes wore a metallic face mask and carried a sword. And model Hunter Schafer was dressed to distress. She wore all-white contact lenses and a spider demon nosepiece. The flamboyance was brazen, with an equal amount of absurd impracticalities that have divided opinion on the internet. Like Kim Kardashian's all-black Balenciaga outfit, the reality TV star turned up in a skin-tight black ensemble that covered her from head to toe, with only one gap for her long ponytail. This outfit has created quite a stir. Many wondered if Kim was trying to help the Taliban impose the hijab. Some asked why the hijab was deemed oppressive, but Kim's look was being celebrated as iconic. And then there was a third category that said she had dressed up like a ninja. In the end, they all declared that the outfit was a new meme, politically correct or not. But some others were not as lucky. Like Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she came dressed in an off-shoulder white gown with "Tax the Rich" written in red. A bold statement, some said, but with complicated optics. Some said the choice was too sanctimonious for an event where tickets cost $30,000 each, and tables were up to $300,000. Some called it vapid virtue selling, slamming AOC for partying with the same elite club she claims to fight. What did the Congresswoman say in her defense? 5 words. The medium is the message, implying that she wanted to bring the debate on a fair tax code to the elite themselves. Whatever be the intention, social media was unsparing in its feedback. At the end of it all, the 2021 Met Gala left you wondering, what was the point of it? Such misery of fashion, with more money than sense. Do we need this at a time when millions have died from a virus, millions more are losing jobs? Also, do COVID concerns apply to high fashion? For most of the world, this is just a distraction. Celebrities in crazy outfits giving us a good laugh. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
But that is a wrap. We're leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks for watching.
One World Trade Center that is the one where the impact.